Salvador Paulo Panelo Jr. He's the counsel for Veronica Kitty Duterte. Good morning, Attorney Paulo.
Good morning, Attorney Karen, and to the viewers of At the Forefront.
Let's start first with last Friday. The ICC denied the application for interim release of former President Rodrigo Duterte. Since you're the counsel for Veronica Kitty Duterte, have you had a chance to speak with either Kitty or Vice President Sara? And what was the reaction to ICC's denial?
Well, as you know, they've already issued a statement that the family accepts the decision with peaceful hearts. And I also messaged them to offering a message of support to the family. I told them that the day might not have gone our way, but the day of reckoning is coming. I know it's coming, that the tide will turn.
2 more years.
And that the legacy of the former president is secured and no action from the ICC can undo it. And Vice President Sara just responded to me with a prayer, thanking God for all blessings seen and unseen, and asking God to help her to be thankful in joy and in hardship. So the message of the family is not lip service. They're really at peace. They were prepared for such an outcome, and that's how they feel.
Let's bring Tatay Digong back to the Philippines, mga kababayan. Ito po yung panonoorin natin sa video na to. Pero bago tayo tumulak dyan, isang share, like, subscribe lamang po mga kababayan. Masaya na po tayo dyan para updated po tayo sa makaganapan dito sa ating bansa. Eto mga kababayan, tumulak po tayo dito sa attorney ni Tatay Digong, si Attorney Sal Panelo Jr., mga kababayan, legal counsel. Eto mga kababayan, wag na po nating patagalin. Eto na po yung video.
Well, let's go to the petition that you first filed with the Supreme Court here in the Philippines. And this was back in March. So the first petition for habeas corpus was filed on behalf of your client, Veronica Kitty Duterte. But days ago, you also filed an urgent motion to consolidate and decide the habeas corpus petitions that were also filed by Congressman Paulo Duterte and Mayor Baste or Vice Mayor Baste Duterte. How does the ICC's denial of the interim release application affect this petition? Do you believe that there's no issue that has become moot and academic?
No, it doesn't affect the petitions for habeas corpus at all. If at all, if the ICC had granted interim release to the president, maybe that changes the calculus of the Supreme Court in how to address the habeas corpus petitions. But since he still remains in custody and he wasn't granted release, then for us, the petitions for habeas corpus should still be resolved. Because,
so all the more that it's not moot.
Yes, correct.
Well, you cited 2 interesting cases. Even for me, I enjoyed reading that urgent motion that you filed with the Supreme Court. So you cited an American case, and this was the recent United States case of Noem versus Abrego Garcia. And this related to a deportation made by the United States of an El Salvador national back to El Salvador.
Yes.
And this was a habeas corpus petition as well to bring him back to the United States. And then the other one is an old 1919 case in the Philippines that I was not even aware about. This was Villavicencio versus Lucban, where the mayor of Manila back in 1919 sent about 170 women of ill repute by boat to Davao, and which was where they were sent as laborers. And the mayor of Manila said that time na wala na siyang power to bring them back because he has no jurisdiction over Davao. Can you tell us more about these 2 cases? Well, starting with the U.S. Supreme Court case that, made a decision to bring back an El Salvador national back to the United States.
Right. The context of these 2 cases is the defense of our national government that they are now powerless to bring PRRD back to the Philippines. And these 2 cases, Noem versus Abrego Garcia and Lucban versus Villavicencio versus Lucban, disprove that point. And most people, kasi they think that since PRRD is no longer in the Philippines, he's detained in the ICC in The Hague, that the Supreme Court has no power, has no jurisdiction over the ICC, has no power in the Netherlands. So that's the context of these two cases. These two cases disprove that. In Noem versus Abrego Garcia, the the U.S. District Court of Maryland ordered the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Noem to facilitate the immediate return of this El Salvador national to the U.S. They rejected the defense that since this El Salvador immigrant already crossed the borders, that the court lost jurisdiction. The court said no. And the U.S. government appealed to the Supreme Court, and they also rejected this defense.
Yeah, the Supreme Court of the United States.
The United States Supreme Court. And as you know, since this is a habeas corpus petition also involving a Bill of Rights protections, this U.S. case has persuasive weight in our Philippine Supreme Court because our Constitution is patterned after the U.S.
Including our writs of habeas corpus.
Correct.
Okay, so what do you envision? Should the Supreme Court grant your plea for habeas corpus, what would the Philippine government do? How can they execute this when, in fact, the ICC has even denied the interim release? So how can you force his release from the ICC?
Yeah, so that's an issue that was also sort of addressed in Noem versus Abrego Garcia, because in Noem, in the U.S., just like in the Philippines, the executive has prerogatives in terms of foreign affairs, in conducting foreign affairs. So what the U.S. courts did there in that case is to give the executive leeway to do what it needs to do to bring this El Salvador immigrant back. They didn't define the steps that they needed to take in respect to give respect to the prerogatives of the executive in foreign affairs. So the directive there was to take all available steps to facilitate the immediate return of Abrego Garcia. And that's the same prayer that we ask of the Supreme Court. We're not asking the Supreme Court to dictate what measures the executive should do, because this would encroach upon their prerogatives, but we're asking them to take all available steps. So Noem Garcia provides a blueprint for our Supreme Court on what it can direct our Philippine government to do.
Yeah, and one of the things that you cited in your urgent motion are the instructions there in terms of just the facilitating.
Yes.
So you leave it up to the executive branch. But also, I think from a legal standpoint, the important point you made was the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court is on the officials that they're asking to facilitate the return. They're not asserting jurisdiction over, in
The
this case,
ICC.
the ICC.
Yes, correct.
Or to President Duterte. Are
Yes.
you acknowledging in this case na wala ng jurisdiction ba yung Supreme Court doon sa body of the person that's subject to of the habeas corpus petition?
So no, what's clarified by Noem versus Abrego Garcia and even in Villavicencio versus Lucban is that a writ of habeas corpus is directed to the respondents in the case, not to the person arrested, not to foreign entities. It's directed to the respondents. So going over to the Villavicencio versus Lucban case, the Supreme Court, our Supreme Court there said, it doesn't matter where the person is confined, as long as the respondents are within the jurisdiction of the court, then it can order these respondents to undo what they had done. So obviously, the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over our government officials. So
Yeah.
that's what's important. I think people are thinking about it wrong when they say the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction over the ICC. That's a given. So what's important here is that the Supreme Court retains jurisdiction, power, authority over our own government officials.
Okay, so in this case, are you visualizing na kailangan mag-private jet din, pabalik? Si former President Duterte, the way they took him out
You know,
of the
they
Philippines?
use the entire government machinery to bring PRRD to The Hague. So the expectation is that they should exercise or exhaust all of this machinery to bring him back.
Yeah.
And in terms of
Alright.
capacity, we've already seen that they can bring
Nice.
home somebody like Congressman Teves, who had a pseudo asylum in Timor-Leste. because the Court of Appeals there rejected our request for extradition. And yet, despite that protection from the Timor-Leste court, they were able to bring him back through diplomatic channels. So it means if there's a will, there's a way. There are things that they can do to facilitate the return of PRRD.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the case of former Congressman Arnie Teves in your urgent motion as an example of a way for the government, the executive branch, to bring back former President Duterte. But correct me if I'm wrong, in the return of Arnie Teves, the Interpol also had participation there. Do you think in this case, the Interpol or some other foreign arm would be able to help return former President Duterte to the Philippines? But before you answer that question, we'll have to take a short break. At the Forefront will be right. Welcome back at the Forefront. We continue our conversation with Attorney Salvador Paulo Panelo Jr. He's the counsel for Veronica Kitty Duterte. Attorney Paulo, how essential is the participation of foreign bodies like, for example, the Interpol in bringing back former President Rodrigo Duterte to the Philippines?
Well, I'm not sure it's that important. I understand that Interpol is just an organization where countries that are members of the Interpol can help each other out in securing arrest or for searching people. So I'm not sure that's too important. What's important to us is that the Philippine government should exhaust good faith efforts, exhaust all their remedies, diplomatic or otherwise, to facilitate the return of the president. We know it's not going to be easy.
The reason I asked about Interpol was because in the Senate hearing that looked into the inquiry into the arrest of former President Duterte, what was being cited was not our commitment to the ICC because we have withdrawn from the Rome Statute, but it was according to the people who attended DOJ Secretary Boying Remulla at the time. They were citing our commitments to the Interpol, our international commitments.
Right, but that doesn't really mean anything because I think everybody knows by this time that the Interpol requests are not obligatory. And what's more important is and it's our position that the Philippine government can no longer recognize ICC jurisdiction, and they cannot do that indirectly by complying with the request from Interpol.
Okay. In your urgent motion, you mentioned the deteriorating health of former President Rodrigo Duterte while in ICC custody. Can you share with us any information on the current health status of the former president?
We can only go by the filings of Nicholas Kaufman, and he's filed a request for indefinite adjournment of proceedings because of PRRD's unfitness to stand trial. He notes deteriorating cognitive health of the former president. But in my personal experience, the last time I saw the president was in January, just over a month before he was taken away to The Hague. I had dinner with him, with my dad, Sal Panelo, and Senator Bongo. And at that time, he was already visibly weak. He needed to be assisted to stand and to walk. He literally had to be carried off the ground to be put inside his car. And his memory was failing him. I remember that the campaign period for the national elections was just about to start. And Senator Bongo was going over the campaign activity schedule for the week with him. And PRD goes, "Bong, kandidato ka ba sa election na to?" So, and they just shot a campaign video of PRRD endorsing the re-election of Senator Go. So that tells you what kind of condition he was in, even before he was arrested. So, my issue with the interim release decision of the ICC is how can this man in this condition be considered a flight risk? How can this man be considered how can this man have the capacity to intimidate witness or interfere with investigations? How can this man be considered influential in a meaningful way if his own government violated its own constitution to deliver him to an international court without jurisdiction. So that just tells you, to me, the denial of the interim release is not just a denial of provisional liberty, but also a denial of humanity and justice.
Well, Kitty gets to see former President Duterte the times that she visited Hague. Did she share with you yung health condition of her father?
Not recently. I only go by the interviews that they give right after they visit. And of course, they say he's okay, but you don't have to be a medical expert to know that this man is not fit to stand trial, let alone detention. Yeah.
Your urgent motion also cited the danger of repetition as a reason for the Supreme Court to decide the petitions for habeas corpus. But last November, then Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin said that the same process that they used to arrest former President Duterte can no longer be used because of the Supreme Court's new rules on extradition. So do you believe that there's no longer any risk that the same manner of arrest might happen to Senator Bato de la Rosa or other people that might be subject of future ICC warrants of arrest?
Yeah, the thing is that after Executive Secretary Bersamin said that, a few days later, the DOJ goes, clarified that they still have the option to go to this executive surrender option. So they told us, the DOJ itself told us, that they can do it again to Senator Bato de la Rosa. But, it's not just Senator Bato de la Rosa and whoever the co-accused of PRRD turned out to be. This case, I think, is also relevant to the ordinary Filipino because the danger here is in a writ of habeas corpus, it can be, what the government is saying is that it can be simply defeated by removing a person outside the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court or of our local court. So it's a slippery slope that the Supreme Court should put a stop to and address immediately.
Well, would granting the petitions for habeas corpus that you filed for former President Duterte undermine the Philippines' cooperation with international bodies, or would it reinforce our sovereignty?
Yeah, I think the Constitution itself mandates the Philippine government to prioritize national interest over cooperation with foreign entities. So I think it would show that the country is a sovereign nation and we are a country of laws, and that we won't let foreign entities influence our domestic affairs.
Have you had any information as well as to where Senator Bato de la Rosa is right now?
No, but I don't really blame him. He's already seen what happened to PRRD, so I don't blame him if he's making himself elusive to Philippine authorities. But I have a theory. About that. I think that Ombudsman Remulla disclosed that information about the ICC warrant because he wanted Bato to hide, because I don't think they want to do the same thing that they did to PRRD. They're projecting that it was legal and everything, but I think they announced this precisely so that Senator Bato could exhaust his remedies.
Okay. So
that's
your theory. Okay.
Yeah.
But if this petition does get decided by the Supreme Court, it can benefit Senator Bato de la Rosa in a sense that should it go the direction of settling the issues that you raised?
Definitely. Because the same issues. Can the Philippine government surrender a person subject of an ICC warrant without going through the local court? I think that's the most basic question. And of course, our position is that they have to go through the the judiciary. There's no option to bypass the judiciary.
Yeah, and with the new rules of extradition issued by the Supreme Court, it does seem to make it clear na kailangan dumaan sa local courts.
Well, yes, in concept, in principle, but what the DOJ is saying is that this is not extradition, this is surrender. But the thing that we've discovered since filing the urgent motion is really surrender is not what the DOJ says it is, which is, to them, it's an executive option that can bypass the local courts. But what we've discovered since filing the urgent motion is that surrender is a technical term for when a state delivers a person to an international court. So it's just a technical term. So if it's state to state, it's extradition. If it's state to an international court, it's called surrender. So it just means that when you do surrender, you have to follow the applicable rules for surrender. In terms of the ICC, the Rome Statute is clear.
You have to
present them to the local judicial authority.
Yeah, which in our case would be the Philippine courts.
Yes.
If the Supreme Court dismisses your petition for habeas corpus, what legal options remain for former President Duterte?
Well, a motion for reconsideration, of course, but if that fails, then there's also still the proceedings in the ICC itself. And if the Supreme Court will dismiss the petitions and say the executive has the prerogative to surrender an individual to the ICC, then maybe the next administration can exercise the same discretion to try to bring him back, even without a Supreme Court order.
Okay, and finally, some critics might say that this is political than purely legal when you filed that petition for habeas corpus. How do you address perceptions that this is a political rescue mission rather than a constitutional remedy?
Oh, like I said, it doesn't affect just PRRD, not only affects Senator Bato, it affects every Filipino. If you speak out against the government, there's a danger that this government can take you away outside the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court or the court and say, we can't do anything about it anymore. So this is a real issue. It's a real problem that should be addressed.
Thank you so much, Attorney Paulo Panelo, and a pleasure to have you here this morning.
Thank you.
Diyan po nagtatapos tong video na to, mga kababayan. Let's bring Fpprd back to the Philippines, mga kababayan. Magdasal-dasal lang po tayo, huwag tayong mawalan ng pag-asa. At dahil in 2 years time naman, reckoning years para sa atin dahil magkaka-election na po. At syempre mapapaupo na po itong si VP Sara at siya na po yung mamuno dito sa ating bansa, mga kababayan. At syempre, malay mo bago yan, mananalo na po tayo dito sa ating request na mapauwi na po si Tatay Digong dito sa ating bansa para dito na lang siya tumira at makasama pa rin niya ang kanyang pamilya. Hanggang dito na lang muna tayo, mga kababayan. Ito po ang News That Matters. Lagi po kayong mag-iingat at lagi nyo pong i-share, like, subscribe lamang po para updated po tayo sa makaganapan dito sa ating bansa. Mag-iingat po tayo lagi, mga kababayan, and God bless.